Brandon Ingram was declared the dream trade target for the Houston Rockets, but it would take a third team to get that deal done. And I'll tell you the perfect team and why it fixes multiple problems for the Pelicans. It's the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Friday show. We were going to try and do it yesterday. Hurricane Francine came through. I hope y'all have power. I hope everyone is okay and that you weathered the storm well. And I appreciate you as you're maybe cleaning up or dealing with some of the aftermath of the storm to just make Locked On Pelicans part of your day when so much other stuff is going on. We got a great show for you. We're going to talk about Brandon Ingram being a dream trade target to the Houston Rockets, but a deal between those two teams don't make sense. We're going to throw the Orlando Magic into the mix, and I'll tell you why that one really works. And then we're going to look at some of the other teams in the Western Conference, the other top 8 or so teams that the Pelicans are going to be fighting for playoff positioning with, and what their biggest issues are and how it might hold them back. We're going to look at a couple of the teams like that. So let's get into all of this. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. Number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 10,000 people, Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everyday. Listen Monday through Friday. So Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report, there's an article out there that is the realistic dream trade target for every NBA team. For the Pelicans, he picked Walker Kessler. That's no surprise. They need a center. We're going to address that here. And Walker Kessler's available. You could also just absorb him into the money, and it makes things, just a little bit easier to get a deal done. But for the Houston Rockets, Brandon Ingram was listed as the ideal trade target, and that makes sense. We've heard some links of Brandon Ingram to the Houston Rockets. I don't know if it makes a ton of sense for them, but if they want to kind of be one of the teams that we would talk about in today's show where they're fighting for a playoff spot, and I look at them as, on the lower end of the play-in tournament right now, they add Brandon Ingram, maybe they shoot up there a little bit. And they've got a bunch of young guys that they're going to need to pay. Do they want to do all of that? It's the same question, though, with Brandon Ingram, too. But let's say they want to go for Brandon Ingram, and let's try and find a deal done. They're not going to trade Alperen Sengun for Brandon Ingram. I think that would kind of be the ideal. Sengun's also do a very big deal. Maybe you do some sort of, extended trade, something like that where you could make that work. Maybe not. Sengun, though, I don't think is going to get thrown in the deal, though I do think he's an ideal big man for New Orleans. So Eric Pincus says maybe you can build a deal around Jaylen Green. And I like this idea. Jaylen Green is a guy that's going to need to get paid. He's a guy that can definitely score. He shoots threes. You can see his fit here in New Orleans pretty easily. Look, anyone who shoots threes is going to fit well here in New Orleans. As a younger guard, it makes this team a little bit more youthful, gives them more potential. Last year, he averaged 19.6 points per game. He did that on 16.2 shot attempts. He shot the three at 7.4 times. He's not a great three-point shooter. It's worth keeping in mind. His career numbers are 33.7%. Maybe he can improve here in New Orleans, but he's willing to take threes, which is sometimes just half the battle, it feels like. Can dish the rock a little bit, but he's definitely more of a scoring two guard, in my opinion. He plays enough defense. I don't think he is elite. At times he can be, look elite on that side of the ball, but he's definitely adequate enough, I would say. The problem with this deal is right now he is only making about $12.4 million. So if we try and trade him to New Orleans, we send Brandon Ingram back to the Houston Rockets, you still need far more to get a deal done. And that's where the Orlando Magic come in. This has been a team that we've heard New Orleans linked to for a while for one player in particular here. And that is, I'm just blanking on everything in front of me here, Wendell Carter Jr., the center. Makes so much sense for the Pelicans. He can shoot threes. He's got some switchability. He's cheap, making about $12 million this year. Let's send him to New Orleans in this deal. And then you start to run into some trouble because the math doesn't really work. You need to send other things to the Houston Rockets. You're going to need to kind of compensate, I think, the Orlando Magic for this deal. But one thing the Orlando Magic would like, because I've talked to their host of Locked On Magic about this, is more shooting and another scoring two guard. Jordan Hawkins, I think you can send out. Basically, this deal for the Pelicans is you send out Jordan Hawkins and Brandon Ingram, and you get back Jaylen Green and Wendell Carter Jr. You need to take away more salary from the Houston Rockets in this trade, and I think you can convince the Orlando Magic, maybe picks are involved in something like that, to maybe take on, Dillon Brooks, or you could send Dillon Brooks to the Pelicans here, and I think it could make a bunch of sense. If you add Wendell Carter Jr., Jaylen Green, Dillon Brooks to the Pelicans, or let's see it doesn't work. Let's add Dillon Brooks to the Orlando Magic that just give them a little bit more depth on the wing. You're pretty close to getting a trade done. The Orlando Magic need to send out about $7 million more to make that deal work. And they happen to have a player that kind of fits in that in Anthony Black. Young guy, didn't play a ton for them last year. If they're getting Jordan Hawkins to kind of be the shooter, do you need Black as much? And maybe you just send him to the Pelicans here. It makes this work. So the 3-team deal, you can put in enough draft picks to kind of make this work, is Dillon Brooks and Jordan Hawkins to the Orlando Magic. The Houston Rockets get Brandon Ingram. And then the New Orleans Pelicans get Wendell Carter Jr., Anthony Black, and Jaylen Green. You could take Black out of there and maybe add someone else in if that's the case, if you want to. That's likely how you're going to get some sort of deal done. I think everyone kind of wins in this one. I think the Orlando Magic probably need another pick or so here because they are giving up a guy that is maybe starting for them, maybe not. That's kind of the big question. But the Houston Rockets get their man in Brandon Ingram. They don't need to give up too much other stuff when it comes to that sort of thing. The Pelicans get a young two guard that can go out and score and probably projects as a CJ McCollum replacement in the future. That makes moving on from CJ McCollum a whole lot easier. And while Green has started every game of his career, there's no guarantee that he needs to do that here in New Orleans. And maybe you just kind of bring him off the bench. You're going to need to pay him, but is he in line for kind of the max deal that Brandon Ingram was? No, I don't think so. And so that helps New Orleans in this. I think they shed salary in this trade by about $18 million. They would love to do a deal like that. Maybe they need to add a little bit more into it in terms of picks because they're shedding so much salary. But basically, everyone is like doing this here. Sorry, the Pelicans don't shed $18 million. They shed they shed about $8 million in this one. The Houston Rockets add about $2 million in this one. And then I think the Orlando Magic are going to add about $7 million here. All those numbers kind of work out and I think are fine for all of the teams involved. It gets the Pelicans under the luxury tax too. Use those future draft picks. You have a team filled with young guys now. You've solved the center position. You've got your replacement for CJ McCollum, meaning you can trade him in the future. Those are exactly the type of deals that New Orleans is looking for here. 3-team trade, some capacity between the Pelicans, the Rockets, and the Orlando Magic, I think makes a whole lot of sense. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. So let's switch gears. We need a break from trade talk. Let's look around the Western Conference here and talk about some of the competitive teams. We're going to look at 5 in the next segment: OKC, Minnesota, Denver, the Suns, and Dallas. And then we'll look at kind of more play-in level teams in the segment after that. That's coming up here next. Where are their weaknesses and how do they kind of stack up with the New Orleans Pelicans? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You hear us talk about FanDuel a lot on here, but today we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game, and all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. And if that's not enough, be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's double your winnings for all of Sunday on the 15th. All those pregame money line bets. Profit Boost will be live starting on yesterday, so it's live right now. So just view your account page now to learn more about your boost. You can also get in on the NBA opening night lines. The Pelicans are a 5-point favorite over the Chicago Bulls. I like that one. Pelicans tend to win their opening night games. You want to get in on that one or any of the other great bets that you can make, just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, Locked On NBA. There's no off season in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's switch gears and look at some of the teams in the Western Conference and not how the Pelicans stack up to them. We got to wait to see a little bit in preseason, I think, and what the Pelicans end up doing. But I think it's worth looking at kind of the concerns and flaws about some of those teams. So let's start with the teams that were at the top of the Western Conference last season. So we're going to look at OKC here. And OKC is going to be good. Now, they're banking on kind of that natural growth and players not taking a step back. And I honestly kind of feel like, yeah, that makes sense with that team. They're going to get better. Chet Holmgren's going to get a little bit better. They were already good. And then they added, two key players, Alex Caruso and Hartenstein, to their roster. And it's going to make them even better than they were when they were first in the Western Conference. And when you look at their health last year, they were healthy. Chet Holmgren played 82 games. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander played 75. For Shai, that's the most he's ever played. A couple of years prior to that, he wasn't playing as many games. Now, some of that has to do with them tanking and shutting him down. So health is really going to be key for some of these teams that we're going to look at, particularly them and the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are also remarkably healthy. Health is a big question for everybody, but when your key guys really don't miss games, can you bank on that year to year? Maybe not. So that's always going to be a concern. We don't need to spend that much time on it. What they're looking at, despite addressing two of their biggest flaws, is, who creates the offense? You have a guy in Chet Holmgren who's a finisher. Hartenstein doesn't create his own offense either. Lou Dort is great, but he's more of a defender and needs someone to set him up. They rely basically on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander being their entire engine. And if he goes down injured, where does that leave them? They don't have that other creator. They had that in Josh Giddey last year, but Giddey was traded away. And now where does it come from? Caruso can do it a little bit, but that's not someone you want to rely on to kind of be your point guard and set people up. It's going to come in the form of a big leap from Jalen Williams, J-Dub, and maybe he can do that. You have Cason Wallace, who as a young rookie, that's a lot to put on it, or a second-year player, that's a lot to put on him. Their offense, should there be an injury to Shai or when he's off the court, could really start to fall apart, and you've got to try and win those minutes. Let's move on to the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that, let's do the Denver Nuggets next. Let's go kind of in order with some of these teams up at the top at the very least. With the Denver Nuggets, look, there's three things here I think that are key to them. Is they're banking on growth from young guys, letting KCP walk and some of these other players that have left them in recent years that they just haven't been able to replace because at times they're being a little bit cheap. and they've got to pay Jamal Murray, more on him in a second. That's going to be, those are just tough shoes to fill. Those were championship level winning players that are now not there anymore. That hurts their depth, in my opinion, makes them a little bit weaker. The minutes when Nikola Jokic didn't play are definitely scary for them. And now you just paid Jamal Murray, and it was the right thing to pay Jamal Murray. We talked about it on Locked On NBA, but he was not great in the playoffs outside of that Lakers series. He was terrible for the Canadian national team. And he has had a lot of injury issues. Now, he maybe had his best regular season ever last year. That's great. He's won a title with them, so there's reasons to believe in him. But basically, if he doesn't live up to that $208 million contract, the Nuggets aren't going to get to the NBA Finals again. And for a team with the best player in the world, in Nikola Jokic, it's kind of a bit of a scary position to be in. So now let's go to the Minnesota Timberwolves. I actually like this team a lot. They took a big leap last year from the year before. They went from 42 wins to 56 wins. They have a very good head coach in Chris Finch. They made it to the conference finals where they struggled mightily against the Dallas Mavericks. But overall, look, you've got a star player in Anthony Edwards that is leading your team. You have the defense from Rudy Gobert, who, while he's like maybe the most unlikable player in the NBA, he's still good and was in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. And, everything with that, and is always in the running for all of that. So he, obviously is very, very talented and very, very good, winning Defensive Player of the Year, I should say. So you have that. You have Karl Anthony Towns, who's good as a second star on that team. Naz Reid just won Sixth Man of the Year. You have good role players in key spots, former Pelican Nickeil Alexander-Walker, right? Mike Conley leading your offenses, that steady presence. But that's where the big question comes in. Those minutes when Mike Conley, who's at age 36, played 76 games last year, isn't on the court. They need that kind of presence to set up your other guys. Anthony Edwards needs a secondary ball handler with them because he's kind of attack and go. You need someone that can pass the ball a little bit more, incorporate those other players into the offense, and that's what Mike Conley does. Their big move to get better in a competitive West was to trade up and draft Rob Dillingham. I don't know if that's the thing that puts you over the top, in my opinion. Rob Dillingham is good. He's the 8th overall pick here, but he's going to be just 20 years old during the regular season. He's 19 years old now when the season starts, and that's a lot of pressure to put on him. He's also very, very undersized. He's 6'1". Is he going to be a defensive liability? And how does that impact them? That's what kind of scares me. The shooting is there. I think the scoring can be there for him. He was great at Kentucky last year. But there's questions about throwing him, excuse the pun, to the Wolves here with this. That worries me. So let's look now at the Dallas Mavericks, who made it to the NBA Finals, beating the Timberwolves 4-1, beating the Thunder 4-2, beating the Clippers in the first round 4-2, right? Like, they won those series pretty handily, in my opinion. But I do also think that they might struggle more than you're expecting. Everyone's kind of putting them in the top of the Western Conference, adding Klay Thompson to the team. They needed more shooting in the playoffs. You saw that need against the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. So he gives you that. But how much does he have left defensively? What got them on that run, after the All-Star break where they were really good, was their defense fueling them, right? PJ Washington playing really well for them. Derek Lively playing really well for them. Daniel Gafford kind of stepping into that starting role and play really well for them. And then Gafford fell off a cliff and didn't do anything, in my opinion, in the playoffs. Derek Lively II stepped in and was, in my opinion, significantly better than Gafford. But at the same time, he's a finishing type of guy. He's going to block shots, but if you put him on the perimeter, you can beat that team. Kyrie struggled in the NBA Finals. In the playoffs, PJ Washington was their third leading scorer. Now maybe it's going to be Klay Thompson, but there's moments when Klay Thompson looked washed with the Golden State Warriors. They signed him to a big deal. He's going to play a big role for him. But if he is not the Klay Thompson of old, I think that helps them. But do the other parts start to fall off too? And that's my big question. Does Gafford not play as well as he did? And if he doesn't, and they're still starting him instead of Derek Lively, it's a problem. Can Lively be more than just, like a cheaper Rudy Gobert and not as good of a Rudy Gobert, right? Like, who doesn't have that kind of ceiling? Those are the things that worry me about that team. Let's wrap up this part of the show with the Phoenix Suns, kind of the other top team in the Western Conference, just based off of talent. But it's only based off talent, and they haven't proven anything yet. They're going to struggle to defend this year. This is also why you want a team like the Pelicans to lean in more offensively, right? Bradley Beal ain't the defender he was. You still have it from Kevin Durant, yeah, but he's getting older. Does he still have the same effort on that side of the ball? You can beat them by outscoring them. They're going to score points. They're not going to be able to stop anybody at all. So this is why you need to kind of lean in offensively in the Western Conference, because all of these other teams are going to do that, and good offense beats good defense in the NBA at this point. But if they can't defend at all, defense still matters. We want the Pelicans to lean a little bit more offensively, but defense still matters, and I want them to be a top 10 defense. I don't really see that from the Phoenix Suns. I think there's going to be a big drop-off there, and if they also, again, health is a big question, they're going to be in a whole lot of trouble. So coming up next, let's take a look at some of the more like kind of play-in level tournament teams. Play-in tournament level teams, that's what I'm trying to say. I'd probably throw the Pelicans in there. These are teams that, could be 6, could be 5. That's kind of that range here. Let's talk about the LA teams, the Kings, and Memphis as well. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that lost in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. And therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back-to-school era can come at any age. Therapy is not just for people who experience major trauma. You can learn positive coping skills, just how to kind of rediscover the joy in life, empower yourself to be the best version of you. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. So rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, Locked On Saints. Big game this weekend. Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints going to cover it all. The offense still going to look that good. Does it change when you go up against a tougher opponent? He's going to make sense of everything black and gold over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's start to wrap up the show by looking at some of these kind of teams more in the Pelicans tier. I think the Pelicans can get close to the top 4, but I think we just covered kind of the 4 or 5 teams that are really kind of considered in that group. You could maybe take Phoenix out of there. But let's look at the other group here. So let's look at the Lakers, because this one's easy, right? It's just health around LeBron and AD. If they have those two healthy for the majority of the year, they're going to go pretty far. But if they're not, and JJ Redick is a first-time head coach in a pressure-filled market struggle, things could fall apart pretty quickly, I think. Now, I'm actually banking on LeBron to be healthy, because there's no reason not to, given, what we've seen from him and how, that they have played and all of those things. But where does D'Angelo Russell really fit in with this team, and how is he going to end up playing? Those are some of the big questions, I think, that we don't know just yet. Russell wasn't great for them at times, and what does that then mean? And those are the big questions around it. Who else basically steps up, and can JJ Redick kind of manage all of the egos and things there? I think it'll be good for a year, but after that, maybe not. And those are the type of things that, concern me a little bit when it comes to, a lot of the guys here on this roster and what they're what they're going to really try and achieve next season. So continuing looking at the kind of not also rans in the Western Conference, but kind of bunched up, bottom middle, upper middle, the Sacramento Kings. The big question here is DeMar DeRozan and adding him in. Was that the right move? Look, he's a talented player. He's a clutch player, but he's a mid-range guy. Is that what they were looking for when you have, one of your star players being a big man in Domantas Sabonis, when you want to create space for De'Aaron Fox? Their issue has also been defensive issues, and DeMar DeRozan is not known for being a defensive guy, right? That's putting it mildly. So if you're trying to kind of improve in that area, and they weren't horrible last year, I'm not really sure that DeMar DeRozan is the guy you want to be the big acquisition for you. The year before last, they were 25th in defense, when they finished third in the Western Conference. DeRozan's not helping them on that side of the ball. They didn't necessarily need more offense, I thought, last year. So him being the big acquisition, I think, is the type of, one, does that upset kind of the balance you had offensively and what made you special? And two, how does that affect you on the defensive side of the ball? Because it still matters. It still matters. All right, the Los Angeles Clippers. I'm not pausing for dramatic effect. I don't even know where to start here. I hated their offseason. I hated their offseason so much. Just letting Paul George walk for nothing ain't it. Like, that ain't it. You're now relying on Kawhi Leonard, who just has not proven that with the health, even if he's relatively healthy during the regular season last year. Cool. You have flexibility. Great. The second Abram scares teams off. You're a worse team, though, with that flexibility. So unless you make a big move that's on the level of, trading for a Paul George kind of guy, you're not going to be better than you were a year ago, in my opinion. I don't care about the depth. I don't care about the flexibility to make future moves or anything like that. You're not going to find a trade that's as impactful. Simple as that. They're worse off. There's a reason that FanDuel has their win drop off from last year. The projected from how many games they won to what they're expected to win this year is pretty steep. It's the biggest, I think, out there. There's reasons for that. I'm just so off of that Clippers team. And then the Memphis Grizzlies. Big question mark. I saved them for last here because I don't know. Now they are dealing with some injuries to start the year. Ja Morant's coming back. That's a huge boost for them. We knew that, but at the same time, is that what was the problem? Now, they were good with him. They were the second best team a couple of years ago in the NBA when he was healthy and leading them, even with, suspensions and things like that. They were fantastic. Yeah, they were the 2 seed. They won 51 games. Look, after Morant basically, had a lost season despite getting 2 wins against the Pelicans in the 9 games that he played, there's going to need to be kind of a reacclimation period. And does that bury them a little bit early? And I think there is some potential for that to be the case. Yes, they drafted Zach Edey, and that kind of plugged a hole where they needed another center. But Edey, while I like him and would have liked him on the Pelicans, I think for his career projects as a backup center, not necessarily a starting guy. Let Edey beat the Pelicans. Ja Morant and Desmond Bane won't have done anything if you're going with that kind of plodding, slow style. That would worry me. If you use him mildly, that's fine. But I think most teams are going to be content to just let Edey do what he does offensively. He's going to help them on the defensive side of the ball. I truly believe that. Just his size is something, and he moves relatively well for that size and what you would expect. But at the same point, are they playing 4-on-5 on offense where they only have 4 guys? Those are kind of my questions there. And Ja Morant is a little bit combustible at times, and we've seen that over his career. So those are kind of my questions about the main teams in the Western Conference. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans. Next week, we are back to 5 days a week as we gear up for the regular season. I'm looking forward to it. Shaking off the rust from the offseason here, back to 5 days a week. Let's get into game shape here on Locked On Pelicans. We're going to do that Monday through Friday, back next week. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.